Okay, so I'm here with Dr. Jeffrey Overall, and um, we're going to be going into a research project that's been ongoing. This is a Kensho research project, and yeah, thanks for joining, Jeff. And um, yeah, I may maybe start out just by telling us a little bit about yourself and maybe what is it that really inspired you to get into this project and what this is.
Yeah,
Mhm.
perfect. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. So, I've been an academic for over a decade and started out doing some research on morality and combining that in with business ethics from an Eastern philosophical perspective as well as a Western philosophical perspective, and was really just trying to understand how managers or business leaders would make unethical decisions. And through that process and that journey of being a professor, I had my own awakening experience, and that completely shifted my self structure. I wanted to dive into learning more about concepts like awakening, spirituality, consciousness expansion, self awareness, and all of these types of things. And my partner and I founded the Global Institute for Conscious Economics, which is a foundation, an organization that focuses on bringing the benefits of consciousness expansion within an organizational context. So, very broadly speaking, being the bridge between consciousness and everything that consciousness entails, and economics and everything that it involves in that space, and really trying to have conversations and providing educational content, be that through events or digital programming around all of these ideas of consciousness within the business space, and how can we help our business leaders get on that path towards enlightenment. So, with the research that I'm going to talk to you about today has really been an evolution of my research around consciousness expansion and awakening, basically just mirroring my own journey on that particular path. And I had some experiences at the Samadhi Center with yourself and your staff and the beautiful environment that you create. And I wanted to really study this further. I wanted to understand what are some of the themes or the contributing factors to people that have spiritual awakenings or kenshos, and what are some of the hindrances to people that, for whatever reason, don't have one in that particular moment in that particular space. So the research is really informed by collecting data, and also there's an ethnography element to it, is that I also walked the same path and had similar experiences to the people that I have studied. So it's just really richens the data.
Mhm. Beautiful. And um, so from my perspective, the research that you're doing is on the participants at the Samadhi Center here. So for me, this study is probably the most exciting study that you could do. Looking at what it is that can sort of lead to an awakening or kensho, and whether there are things that we could do better, or there are things that could be more sort of on the radar. If we're starting to connect with groups of people, who are the ones who are really going to be ready for this, and who are going to benefit the most from it. And so to me, this is the most exciting research that we could do. And yeah, so Um, so maybe you could talk a little bit about yeah, just the broad picture of what this study is, that maybe the different phases of it as well, because there are different sort of phases that we've been going through.
Yeah, for sure. So really I'll speak about the intentions. What were the intentions for starting this research, and why did I really want to dive into it? So really I wanted to understand the categories or the themes that would come out of having conversations and interviews with people that have had Kensho's spiritual awakening. So what I did was I interviewed 13 individuals that had a Kensho spiritual awakening. So I really wanted to know what were the reoccurring themes that came out of those conversations with people that had Kensho spiritual awakening. So I spent an hour with each individual. I recorded the interview so that I can analyze them afterwards. And then once those themes started to come forward and to present, I wanted to understand, was there some sort of combination or various combinations that could present and aid people in having a spiritual awakening. So I used a few different types of tools, methodological tools that would help me to understand what those types of patterns of themes might be. And then I also wanted to understand, what were the outcomes? How did people's lives change after they had a spiritual awakening? So that was like a really, really important thing that I wanted to study, is say, people have an aspiration for these types of awakenings. And then I wanted to know, did their lives improve? Did they experience more joy in their life? So that was something that I really wanted to understand.
Mm.
And then when all of that information came forward, I really wanted to go to the other side of that spectrum. I wanted to talk to people that hadn't had a Kensho spiritual experience during their time at the Samadhi Center. And again, so what I did is I interviewed 13 individuals that hadn't had that type of experience. I recorded those. I spent an hour with each of those folks. And I wanted to see what are the categories and themes that came forward for those particular people that prevented them, or in some ways caused them to a hindrance or stood in their way of them breaking through and having an awakening experience.
Mhm.
And again, using some of the method tools available, trying to understand what are the combinations of themes for individuals that would stand in their way or prevent them from having those experiences. And really, the objective is to understand, how can we generalize this over a broad, larger group of people so that, changes can be made for future events, to understand how can awakenings be optimized.
Mhm. And so these participants were people who went through a retreat at the Samadhi Center, where we sort of create these conditions of no escape for the egoic mind, to bring about that flip of consciousness, Kensho or Samadhi. So the 13 participants were, so the identifying of these participants was done by the facilitators at the retreat. So these are people who clearly, from the perspective of the facilitators, um, had an awakening, and we sort of have a, you know, there in Zen there are these 8 signs of Kensho, or there are different ways, clear markers for an awakening. So essentially, for those who are watching, the main aspect of that, or the main thing that we're looking for, is that there's a flip of the sense of I from the conditioned character to the unlimited I, or to, you could say, primordial awareness itself. And so for the facilitators, this is something that is unmistakable. It's very, very clear, and there's certain phenomena that is very obvious. So it was an anonymous study. We didn't tell people one way or another. So that identification was just sort of on our side of just picking those people where we saw that happen. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And so with these 26 individuals in the two groups, the group that had the Kensho, they were exposed to a certain set of questioning. And then for those that did not have that experience, they were exposed to a completely different set of questions. And we went through the interview process just the exact same.
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe we could start by just talking a little bit about what those questions were. What were the things that were just sort of initially on the radar for that questionnaire. Mhm.
Yeah, so the first with the interviews, it was a semi-structured approach. So I did all the interviews myself, and I have a set list of questions to ask. There's usually about 10 different questions. And depending on the responses that I receive from the participant, I'll use my self-awareness or my intuition to allow myself to be guided to probe on certain things that I find interesting in the moment, and then don't really discover until later on why those additional questions that weren't necessarily on my list were asked. So a lot of the questions that I asked were around what was their life like prior to their time at the Samadhi Center? Were there, extrasensory perceptions at an early age? Were there any, spiritual awakenings or awakenings that happened in their childhood? I would ask them questions around any type of small T or big T type traumas. And then for the group that had a Kensho experience, I brought them back to the moment that they had the experience, and was asking them to very generally just describe what it was that they were experiencing, any feelings, any sensations, emotions, anything that they could remember. And they would just share whatever that came forward for themselves in that particular moment. And then for the individuals that didn't have a Kensho, I would still talk about their childhood around spirituality and traumas and anything related to maybe some mental health issues that would present, stress, anxiety, depression, ask both groups those types of questions. And I really wanted to understand, for the people that didn't have a Kensho, if there was any strong emotions, feelings that happened during their time at the retreat, just to get a real sense if there was anything from a feeling or an emotional perspective that maybe would be a block to releasing a lot of those stories that the mind would carry forward, that would potentially keep them in a particular pattern or a way of the mind thinking that would maybe act as a hindrance for them to break through.
Hmm. So you're looking for common patterns. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the statistical method itself that you're using. Maybe just like not maybe too technical, but a bit of an overview, just to explain a little bit, on that side how this works and what you're using there for
Yeah,
analysis.
for sure. So for the interviews, what I did was I went through the interviews and I used a which is a qualitative methodology using what we call grounded theory techniques. And how that works is that every interview is fully transcribed, and then during the process of analyzing, every line in the interview is what we call coded. So we use Microsoft Word, we'll create a comment, and then for every line there's a comment that's made that says, what is being discussed here, what's the topic, and then do that for all the interviews. And when we went through in the first phase of the people that had a Kensho experience, there was 1,100 just codes for each of the lines in the entire 13 transcripts. So then we go through each of those and we try to get an understanding of what are the reoccurring themes, what are the reoccurring topics that are coming up. And then we start grouping those into main categories. So we get those down, the categories, to around 5 to 7. In each category, there might be, 2 to 3, maximum 5 themes that are within the same category. So with that qualitative information, then I will do a sort of a quasi qualitative, quantitative statistical analysis, and that's called qualitative comparative analysis, commonly referred to as QCA. It uses Boolean algebra, and I have a type of software, it's called FSQCA, that allows me to run through these main categories that come forward and the outcome of somebody not having a Kensho or somebody having a Kensho, and seeing what are the combinations that present for providing the best explanation for somebody that will likely have a Kensho.
Hmm. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I guess um, there's like the statistical sort of scientific aspect, and then I guess on a personal level, there's just sort of things that they just become clear as well, like certain patterns that are obvious or certain things that you start to note just in your interviews with people as well. Is that accurate or?
Yeah, what really came out of that first phase of doing the interviews and understanding the main sort of categories that came forward for people that had a Kensho, and there was 6 of them that presented, and the first one that was the most important that everyone in the study experienced was a dark night of the soul.
Mhm.
So everyone that had a Kensho experience, they had this dark night of the soul experience. And this involved things like people having burnouts or just hitting a rock bottom, like a physical, mental, emotional, just this state of peak suffering. And
Mhm.
100% of the people that had a Kensho experienced this. And there was, other types of things that would present, like being caught in rigid patterns of trying to control. And it was really just noticing the challenges that people experienced with just letting go and trusting in the unknown. And that is a very difficult thing for people that, in general, people that have had awakenings, in particular in this study, that was another aspect within the dark night of the soul.
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
second,
to me
yeah, you
that
go
that
ahead.
so that insight is incredibly interesting to me. So for you to say 100% of people who had an awakening experienced a dark night of the soul. So to me that dark night, just for people who are watching, that term, I think it came from Saint John of the Cross originally. um, and it's something very key, I think, to understanding really what's happening in this awakening process. So sometimes we have like a glimpse of our true nature, or there can be, for some reason life has provided some sort of interrupt in the pattern of me, and so there's this break that happens in the pattern. And so it can be, sometimes it can happen from an awakening or a glimpse of our true nature. Sometimes it can be, all different phenomena can interrupt one's pattern. But that dark night, I think, is, what's common in it is that, the ego structure feels very uncomfortable. There's a, something has been interrupted there, so there can be a confusion, of feeling lost, just sometimes a purposelessness can come, and a depression. All these kinds of phenomena can unfold. So it's really interesting, and to me the conditioned self has to go through this sort of letting go process. It's a slow dying, or slow letting go of that conditioned character. So this to me is a key part of, becoming grounded in our true nature, is that self structure. Sometimes it can let go with greater ease, and sometimes this letting go period can be drawn out for years even. So yeah, so I
Oh, for
just wanted
sure.
to throw that in there. Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for elaborating on that. Yeah, exactly. And the other theme or main category that presented for 100% of the people that had a Kensho was a prior spiritual awakening. Just, yeah, put it in the category of a prior spiritual awakening. So they were primed for that. So the ego, or the egoic structure, had already had some of those, I guess, if we want to use the metaphor of just an outer shell, was starting to already have some cracks into it that would allow that experience to break through and emerge.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
And
amazing. Hmm.
And some of those, so close to 60%, would have had those from childhood, would be when that would start, and it would just really continue throughout their lives. So some people would have, a couple, two or three, and some people would just, so it was a journey that was really an ongoing evolution through the life. And for some people, it started early. For other people, they might not have even had a prior awakening experience, and they just happen to have a Kensho, slightly more rare, but it did occur.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so that to me is really important information. And I'm not sure, to me, like, just intuitively, it seems like those two aspects sort of go together, where, if somebody has a glimpse or an awakening, quite often, the energy there's always, an energetic component to that awakening, where the energy becomes free of the conditioned pattern, and it has its own life, its own movement. And so the ego structure, the dark night is really just the resistance of that ego structure to that unfolding of this new direction. So so if we can allow that unfolding to happen, and move with that energy with greater ease, rather than resisting and the energy trying to go back in that old pattern. To me, that's an important insight. There's a real truth there, that this process is necessary, and it is really sort of inherent within the awakening journey.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
part of the rite of passage, really, if we want to use those words. And another part of it was, in another category that came forward, was um, seeking, where people had this intuitive knowing that there was something beyond this particular reality, or just the way that they chose to live their life up until they had a Kensho experience. So people were 100% of the people were in this mode of constantly searching for something. It would be often an internal seeking. So they would be seeking peak experiences. Some of it would involve really within the context of self-improvement. So there was always this knowing and looking and trying to find something, and it was always directed within themselves.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's interesting. And to me, the Kensho, the realization is the recognition of who had been seeking all along. That seeker sort of has to drop away or let go. But it's interesting that it seems to be an inherent part. Just in my own journey as well, there was a lot of seeking going on for many years, and it seems like there's something that has to happen there, sort of alchemy, or and that conditioned self has to eventually fail at that seeking, in order for that flip to happen. But it seems, we can't avoid it. At the same time, it seems like it's an important part of the journey. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. And another part that 85% of the people had experienced was trauma in some form of another that would have an impact on their awakening experience. And there's been a lot of study on traumas and near-death experiences as a catalyst to awakening. Not everyone will have an awakening experience through trauma, but these are the moments in life where there is a shock,
Mhm.
and people often, will their self structure is in a traumatic state, and then it's possible when the mind is occupied in that traumatic state, there's an ability for that true essence to present.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's really interesting. So generally speaking, if someone's life is just sort of going along, all comfortable, and they're just in their pattern, they're probably less likely to have an awakening. If everything's good, they're enjoying the show, then that interrupt isn't as likely to happen. And so yeah, so that trauma. Do you have is that something that you expected in the study yourself, like, or was that a surprise, or?
That really wasn't much of a surprise. I had, just from my own personal experiences, like through my own awakening experience occurred through trauma. There was a near-death experience for me, and also with my partner, and doing some research within the scientific community. There is a body of research on trauma, near-death experiences, and the role that those play in spiritual awakening. So I included a question around that just to see within the context of the Kensho, which is a different type of spiritual awakening, if there was some consistency with that other body of research.
Hmm. That's great. Yeah. For me, on my own journey as well, it really was born out of suffering and out of, coming close to death as well. So to me, it makes sense that, there has to be some sort of shift. For me, it seemed like my journey was a shifting out of the Dan character pattern that was embedded in the Matrix, and yeah, it's like at that time in my life, I think the only thing that could have shifted me onto a different course was, a serious illness or some sort of traumatic intervention of life. So yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
because without those, like you said, there's just everything's happening, is rolling along fine. So the mind is content because it's in control,
Yeah.
and it will continue to maintain that control. But as with life, it's an impermanence situation, and there's nothing that's permanent about it. So the mind will eventually um, experience discomfort no matter what it attempts to do. And in its attempts of maintaining comfort, it's in a perpetual state of discomfort.
Hmm. Yeah. And so when the traumas happen, then I guess there were other indicators or other things that were maybe not as prevalent, but and I think that maybe speaks to the paths that people can take as well. There are many ways that people can sort of deal with what's unfolding in life as well. But maybe we can mention some of the other aspects in the study or things that were maybe in common, but not as not as common to everyone. But
Yeah, and one of those was just the role of the ego and how that played for each of the individuals, and that would manifest in sometimes limited self-awareness, or there would just be this separation experience that would look like low self-esteem at times. There was also some instances of people having self-sabotage tendencies
mhm,
if their
that's a
ego
big
was
one.
threatened.
Hmm.
That was a really important one. So when the ego was threatened, there would be experiences of people having the self-sabotage where when there's a sense of being on the verge of something, there was some discussion of people just wanting to leave. They're like,
Hmm.
I got to get out of this place.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And was there any commonality in people who have had Kenshos? Was there a commonality in terms of what they had practiced, in their sadhana, like anything like, doing Vipassana retreats or that type of thing, or does it not seem to be mattering too much?
That was something that didn't really come forward too much. And I think it was just a matter of the questioning. There wasn't too much emphasis around practices that people would use. But that could be something to look into in a future study.
Hmm. Hmm. Are there any other little tidbits or insights that you want to share?
Yeah, so what I really wanted to understand with all of that came forward is that what was using that second study of that second method of putting all of those main categories into the software to try to formulate or develop a preliminary model of what Kensho spiritual awakenings will look like. And what I found that the two most important categories or variables that contribute to awakening was prior spiritual awakenings and childhood spiritual experiences. So for individuals that presented those two, was like 70% of the people. So 70% of the people that had awakenings, they had, prior, like I said earlier, where there was just like this sequence or this ongoing experience leading to their eventual Kensho, and they had these childhood experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, this is something that I've always wanted to know more about because, in the self-inquiry world, the Charles Berner community, they've been doing these dyads for decades, and it seems like the very most that any facilitator can get is about a 30% success rate in a retreat. It never seems to change. It doesn't matter who the facilitators are or how they tweak the technique or the process itself. And people have tried everything over the years, but it seems to kind of cap out at about 30%, which to me, like looking at this study, it seems almost like life itself is sort of seasoning people or preparing people for this awakening, and these these prior sort of loosening of the bonds of the self structure are necessary. And so it's giving a little more insight into why that might be, that it just sort of caps out at 30%.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing was then taking all of that and then going to that second group. And what was so fascinating for them was there was this constant searching as well, but it was externally. So the power was given outside of themselves. So 100% of the people that didn't have a Kensho were looking for like a teacher, a guide. They were giving all of their power outside of themselves, which
Mm.
seemed to act as a hindrance because, as you say, with the self-inquiry, the ironic aspect about it is you're looking within, and for a person that is looking outside of themselves, that it's too much of a step to have the awakening if they're just looking constantly outside of themselves,
Mhm.
which was such an interesting aspect. And it was um there was a lot of this ego blocking that was starting to occur, um that sort of looked like um people had to almost like it was manifesting in a lot of confusion and delusion that people would experience, which was so interesting, is that out of anybody that I interviewed that didn't have a Kensho experience, they all had this delusion and confusion. There was confusions around terminology. There was just a grasping for trying to um, use spiritual experiences or terminology or metaphors. And what I noticed with this particular group is that there were so many people that wanted to demonstrate their knowledge or their expertise. And I'd ask a question and they wouldn't really be answering it. They would go down these tangents of rambling or trying to display themselves in a way that they wanted to be seen and recognized. And sometimes that manifested in their retreats of taking up a lot of space, like just yelling and, really acting out like they were having a spiritual experience. And the interesting thing was about little less than half of the people convinced themselves that they had a Kensho.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting, and that really lines up with what I've witnessed at retreats as well. It's like the biggest block seems to be that the ego structure will manifest what it thinks samadhi or kensho looks like. So it's like the mind is creating a facsimile of that, based on whatever they've read or teachers, so, and like you said, there's this projection outward, so like looking for an answer, in on the level of mind, usually, always on the level of mind, because that's what's blocking. So there's this, rather than going in and finding what's here, there's it's always this searching with the mind. So, so the inquiry into our true nature, we know we can't do that with the mind. If you use the conditioned mind to search for the true self, um, it's a, like you said, it's a delusion, or something that has to be dropped at a certain point. And usually everybody at the beginning has that. So it is a process as well. When we begin to do inquiry, it's always the false self that's there. So I guess some people, it just seems that goes on for the retreat, and they can actually convince themselves that they've had an awakening, even though, um, the circumstances don't really bear that out.
Yeah, and a lot of those blockages came forward in strong emotions. There was a lot of, I would say, even though energies of rage and anger were expressed out, my intuitive sense and being quite empathetic to the emotions of others, I still felt a real sense of anger that was really just on the surface
Mhm.
that hadn't yet been felt and released. So that was a big block for this particular group of people. And from, doing that second qualitative comparative study, what I noticed, and this was fascinating, it was such a robust model trying to, create a preliminary model for a non-Kensho experience. And 13 people, 100% of the population had this seeking externally, as well as these blockages of either self-sabotage, where people would literally convince themselves they had an awakening so they could just, the mind could just go on autopilot. And, as what's wanted is the mind is, able to be to fall away, but the mind was still very present in that it could go on autopilot and then just not allow for that awakening experience to carry forward. So it was just really the mind closing and allowed itself to just kind of leave and go on vacation and just really block the potential for that awakening to occur.
Mhm. Yeah, wow, it's fascinating. And
Mhm.
yeah, I want to highlight one thing you said about, the unprocessed emotions as well. So you actually felt like, as the interviewer, you could feel that there was, anger actually coming up in the interviews, or these emotions coming up.
Oh, for sure. There were a couple of people that were telling stories and they were actually yelling.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, they weren't yelling at me, they were yelling and just in a very angered state. And then there was one individual that was in the explanation of providing an example was actually like swearing at me
Mhm. Wow.
in anger, and it was just really interesting to witness that experience in comparison to the group of people that had a Kensho, and they were very calm. There was a I would say authentic calmness, authentic peacefulness.
Mhm.
Whereas in the group that didn't have a Kensho, there was some people would display a calmness, but there was just a sense of, and with complete compassion, and th there was an aspect of inauthenticity to it. It was almost just um like pretending to
Yeah.
be, yeah.
Yeah. So the mind making a facsimile of what that would look like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really interesting. And to me, the benefit of this whole awakening is, an authentic equanimity that is realized, when we realize we're not that conditioned character where all these emotions and the craving and aversion and all of that lies. Then that when that flip happens, there is an equanimity that comes. And so the fact that that was observable on the study is amazing. That's really really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And for the people that that are watching that have had a Kensho experience, what I found with interviewing people that had them was, the mind comes back. I mean, this is the mind is a tool for survival.
Mhm.
So it does continue to present, though people are have greater awareness of the mind and they're able to identify it a little bit easier, and that process seems to continue to evolve over time. It's not the Kensho and then, you know, hallelujah, it's
Yeah,
finished.
yeah, yeah. That's it exactly. I think to me, it's the beginning of really seeing the truth of how it all works, and but yet there's this whole development process then that unfolds once we know we're not becoming as identified with the mind, but still, when the charge of life, in the matrix, when there's a lot of energy, then we can still, of course, become identified with the mind. But yet we've had that glimpse, or we know who we are. We know we're not the mind, even though somehow that magnetism, it's very very strong, and it's like the whole setup of the matrix is to bring about this identification. But this to me, the awakening is the opening into the truth of who we are, and then over time we get more and more grounded and and start to live more and more from that place as we move through this development process.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is that, for those individuals that hadn't had a Kensho, I I interacted with them in a moment in time. Like obviously the life of like there may be Kensho for them in their future. And really the interesting sort of sum up of comparing the two groups was the similarity was there was a seeking. the non-Kensho group was they were putting it outside of themselves. The Kensho were looking within, and both of them had trauma. And
Mm.
the reality is, if we're living in this reality, in this dimension, in this realm, I don't know really anybody that's not coming out of it unscathed. There's trauma. There's
Mhm.
trauma that presented in both groups. But the main differences were the confusion, the blockages, and these real unprocessed strong emotions.
Mhm.
So those were the real things that, for maybe people that have been on your retreat and haven't had a Kensho, it's really, okay, put the focus back within yourself. And if there's confusion, maybe just let's put the confusion aside and let's maybe focus on some of our emotions that haven't been processed, and really some of these blockages that are presenting in our self structure.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. And to me, the confusion, at these retreats, it's something that arises, and it's actually, I actually see the confusion as positive. It's like if the mind is a don't know mind, the not knowing is a sort of confused mind, or if the confusion, if the mind is fighting, to try and know, then then it's in a battle with itself. But if we can sort of allow that confusion to just be there, without trying to know, without trying to solve it, as a problem to be solved on the level of mind, then we can actually, the confusion can be the doorway into a don't know mind. So to me, it's a perfect, a perfect sort of marker. If we can be comfortable in that not knowing, that is sort of the gateway into, creating these conditions where that flip can be more likely to happen.
Yeah, like 100%. After I had experienced a Kensho, I then started to realize all of those, and I haven't had that much of an exposure to Zen practices or the Zen tradition, other than being aware of some of those pop culture themes of what's the sound of a tree, if they're, the tree falling in the forest, or the sound of one hand clapping. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh, now I know why they were doing that. They were trying to confuse the mind.
Yeah.
And it made complete sense to me afterwards. And I was like, yeah, okay, just confuse the mind. That's exactly what you want.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I think for some people, they have, for whatever reason, a capacity to just allow the mind to sort of fail, or to become confused. Whereas other people, they get angry, or they're still fighting, they're still trying to know, and they're grasping onto definitions and concepts and ideas and all of that. And so that letting go is not as graceful, or it's a more drawn out process for some people.
And I think that's where the entheogens can help with sort of breaking down some of the what the mind will try to grasp onto. And it's just that sort of there's a real connection to, and you alluded to it there, with that confusion and those strong emotions. And they're completely and fully interrelated, because when the mind gets confused, that anger presents, and then an entheogen will be able, a plant medicine will be able to help that strong emotion to be unearthed and hopefully release. And then maybe going back to that confusion where there isn't so much of that emotion present, which can then allow that flip to occur. But if those emotions are there, and they want to be released and they're not, then that's the block.
Hmm. Yeah, I think to me, on the path, there are these two dimensions that we're working in, where we're doing these self-inquiry practices, but also, like you said, with the entheogens, or some of these practices where we're going into the somatic field, starting to really feel deeply into these areas that are usually unconscious, and we're bringing up the whatever we find there into the light, so feeling the emotions that we originally didn't want to feel. They were whatever charge in our lives, it was too strong, so it got pushed into the unconscious, and we want to bring these things up in different ways. And so the plant medicines can be amazing for that, or some of these techniques like the Vipassana or somatic um, type of meditations, where we're going into the subtle aspects of the energy body. These are amazing practices for really releasing these imprints, and sort of reclaiming that energy that's going into those unconscious patterns.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. So, yeah, so these are some really important takeaways. To me, this. So maybe where do you see, or what has this brought up for you in terms of where you would want to go next with this investigation?
So I want to study those preliminary models that came out of this a little bit further on a larger population of people, just to generalize it. With such a small sample size, it can't be generalized with a level of confidence that would be appropriate to that you would need. So really the phases of the research arise with an exploratory project like this, and then with the findings for that, trying to go to a larger population to do some more robust statistical analyses. And that's where I would see this particular phase presenting and trying to generalize those models that came forward. And through that, really just it's an ongoing evolution of a process. For me, is trying to understand this a little bit further. One particular area that I want to take this through is really trying to get a good sense of the role of the ego, and I need strong egos with that, within, the narcissistic personality types, or a Machiavellian personality type, a psychopath personality type. So these are individuals that are very much of a strong egoic nature. There is the theme in popular culture where people believe that narcissists are the ones that are in control and have a lot of the power. In some cases, that's true. What I've noticed is that there's really no statistical difference between, business people in particular, and the average person. There's no real more narcissistic than anyone else. And there are a lot of narcissists in power. So I want to be able to look at what are ways that, if it's possible, to create environments for very strong egoic self structures that are narcissists. How can awakenings manifest in those populations of people? And in a lot of ways, with the Global Institute for Conscious Economics being a bridge between consciousness and economics, the real goal is to help business leaders find enlightenment, to provide circumstances for them to awaken. So that's really getting to the crux of what I'm the most fascinated with. So that's really the path that I see this research leading me towards.
Amazing. Yeah, I can't think of anything more important to do in the world. If we could, get the the leaders of countries and businesses and all of these power structures, to awaken, even just a few of them, it could make such a massive difference. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your work, your hard work, and for everything that you shared today. Yeah, it's been amazing, and yeah, I look forward to exploring as we're on in the Awaken the World, initiative. We're sort of ramping up our online IM retreat as well. We've gone from doing just smaller in-person retreats with like 16 people to, now doing 300 at a time online. And this research is really important, I think, to put things in place so that whatever evolves we can just really sort of optimize it and help it to evolve in the best way possible. Yeah. So,
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for inviting me today to share this research. Thank you for the important work that you do and the Samadhi Center and Awaken the World. It's been an extremely valuable resource for me in my journey and in my path. And I have so much gratitude for you and the work that you do. It's so important in the world. So thank you.
thanks, Jeff.
Mm.